Messiah didn't heal people just as random compassion. It was a covenant restoration in motion. People read the healings as just some isolated miracles. You have a blind man sees, a lame man walks, a leper's cleansed, and yeah, that's true. But under the architecture, those healings are doing far more than just fixing bodies. They're restoring people to their place inside the covenant system. Let's start with layer one, the temple pattern. Healing in Yahusha's ministry is fundamentally a restoration of covenant access. The temple system had a direct link between physical condition and access to sacred space. Skin disease excluded you from the camp. Bleeding made you perpetually unclean. Blindness, lameness, and deafness disqualified Levites from priestly service. These weren't arbitrary rules, they're architectural. The body's condition mapped to covenant standing and spatial access within the sacred structure. So when Yahusha heals a leper, he's not just fixing skin, he's restoring covenant access. The leper was outside the camp, outside the covenant spatial structure entirely. Healing returns him inside. And that's why Yahusha consistently tells healed people to show themselves to the priest. That instruction isn't incidental, it's a completion of the temple pattern layer. The healing initiates the restoration, the priestly declaration completes it. Now, let's go to layer 3, the Sinai covenant lawsuit. Several of Yahusha's healings operate explicitly within the covenant lawsuit framework. John 9 is the clearest case. The disciples ask, whose sin caused the man's blindness? That's a lawsuit question. Who's the defendant? What's the charge? What caused the judgment condition? But Yahusha reframes the entire legal question. The man's condition isn't a verdict against him or his parents, it's a setup for a covenant demonstration. The lawsuit framework's there, but Yahusha's operating at a different stage of it than the disciples assumed. Then look at the woman bent double for 18 years in Luke 13. Yahusha calls her a daughter of Abraham, whom the adversary has bound. That is covenant legal language. She has covenant identity, daughter of Abraham. She's under unlawful binding by an adversarial force, and her release on the Sabbath is the appropriate covenant action. He's not overriding Torah by healing on the Sabbath, he's fulfilling it. The Sabbath is the appointed time for release from bondage. The Jubilee logic and the Sabbath logic both converge here. The Sabbath is the weekly Jubilee pulse, and release from binding is precisely what the Sabbath declares. So that takes us to layer 2, the Modim cycle. The Sabbath healings aren't coincidental. Yahusha heals on the Sabbath repeatedly and deliberately. That's a Modim layer statement. The Sabbath is the covenant time marker for completion, rest, and release. Healing on the Sabbath isn't provocation for its own sake, it's a Modim layer declaration. This is the appointed time for this kind of restoration. The religious leaders object because they're operating in the administrative layer of the Sabbath. Rules about what counts as work while completely missing the covenant architecture layer, which is the Sabbath as the pulse of release and completion. Now, let's go to layer 5, the Jubilee release pattern. Every healing Yahusha performs is a Jubilee event in miniature. The Jubilee structure is bondage, appointed release, and return to inheritance. The blind receive sight. They're released from the bondage of darkness and return to full participation in covenant life. The lame walk. They're released from immobility and return to the ability to ascend. The deaf hear. They're released from isolation and return to the covenant community that operates through the spoken word of Torah. Luke chapter 4, verse 18 to 19 is Yahusha reading Isaiah 61 as his mission statement. And it's entirely Jubilee language. Liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, release to the oppressed, the year of Yahuwah's favor. That's Jubilee. He's announcing that his ministry is the Jubilee event operating at the scale of the individual body and the scale of the covenant community at the same time. Then, layer 4, the Eden Ark, right here. This is the deepest layer. The conditions Yahusha heals are conditions that entered the covenant world through exile, pain, suffering, corruption, death, bodily breakdown. All of these belong to the world east of Eden. So when Yahusha heals, he's not just performing compassionate acts, he's reversing in specific local instances the conditions that exile introduced. Every healing is a preview of full Eden restoration. Revelation 22 says, no more crying, no more pain, no more death. That's the completion of what Yahusha's healings were previewing at individual scale. This is why the healings are signs, not merely miracles. A miracle is a power demonstration. A sign points to a larger reality. The healings are signs of the coming full restoration of covenant space and covenant body. They're Eden Ark events. The ark is moving toward total restoration, and the healings are moments where that destination breaks backward into the present. And then layer 6, pulse mathematics. The concentration of healing activity in Yahusha's ministry follows pulse 14, threshold and transition. His ministry is a threshold event. It's a crossing point between the old covenant administration and the new covenant reality. The healings cluster at threshold moments because they're the physical expression of covenant transition taking place in real bodies. Pulse 14 marks decision, entry, and crossing. Every healing is an individual crossing from the exiled condition back toward covenant wholeness. And that matters because the healing isn't random mercy detached from structure. It's a pulse event. It's covenant transition made visible. A blind man crosses from darkness to sight. A lame man crosses from immobility to movement. A leper crosses from exclusion to re-entry. A bound woman crosses from oppression to release. And the pulse is written into the restoration itself. So what's Yahusha's healing ministry under the architecture? It's a multi-layer covenant restoration event operating simultaneously across the entire system. Temple access restored, lawsuit conditions overturned or reframed, Sabbath and Modim release enacted at the appointed time, Jubilee inheritance returned, Eden restoration previewed locally, threshold pulse marked in bodies as covenant transition. The people healed weren't just physically better, they were architecturally repositioned inside the covenant structure. And that's why the religious leaders were so threatened. It wasn't that he was just breaking rules, it was that he was operating the covenant system at a level that bypassed their administrative authority entirely and demonstrated that the architecture was his alone to operate.